Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How's it going? I'm hoping you're having a good day. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to talk about emotions and animal defenses. So by animal defenses, I mean things such as fight, flight, freeze, fold, and asking for help. And how are they connected? And how could we learn how to better regulate them? All right. So if you're working on your own emotion regulation, this is a good lesson for you. All right. So I'm going to pull this up for us. All right. So if you look carefully at this picture, right, so the girl on the left looks like she's in fight mode. The girl in the middle looks like she's in flight mode. And the girl on the right looks like maybe she's in freeze or shutdown mode. Okay, so that's representing our animal defenses. And there's emotions that go along with them. All right, so we're going to put this all together today. So first, we're going to talk about what they call kind of like everyday, what I'll say, life-enhancing emotions. So when we're in a comfortable level of arousal in our window of tolerance, and we feel some emotions, chances are it just adds a little bit of more flavor and color and interest to our life. It makes us more in touch with what's going on with us, and it's manageable, right? So those emotions have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when we express them, we feel better, and it helps to enhance our experience. Okay, so if I watch a sad movie and I feel sad and I cry a little bit, that's okay. Or if someone tells a joke and I laugh and I feel some joy, that's pretty pleasant, right? If I feel a little nervous because I'm getting ready to give a speech and talk to you guys on YouTube, that's not so bad, right? It's part of my comfortable everyday ups and downs of emotions, but it's in my arousal zone that feels good to me. So that's why it's life enhancing. I don't feel dull. I don't feel blah. I feel like a little bit of stuff as my day goes on. Okay. So that's the parts that we are hoping to have more of. Okay. So on the other hand, they talk about what they say vehement or dysregulated emotions. So vehement, another big vocabulary word. So what does that mean? It means to show strong feeling. So forceful, passionate, or intense. So passionate, intense emotions that are usually associated with hyperarousal or heightened arousal or hypoarousal or low arousal. So if you look at the pictures I selected on top, it might be intense anger, intense fear, or major numbness or shutdown, right? So those are more intense emotions that are associated with our defenses, okay, such as fight, flight, freeze, fold, and asking for help, okay? So a lot of the time, I mean, this is helpful when we're actually in situations where we're in danger or in threat, because these emotions enhance our actual animal defenses. So when I feel like fighting, am I using my fight defense, and there's rage and anger behind it, it helps my fight defense to work better for me. It helps me to fight off the enemy. Or if I feel like running away, like a flight defense, and there's anxiety and fear behind it, it fuels my ability to run away and escape, right? So they work together to help us survive. So that's why they're built in that way. And they have to be intense because you got to get your attention, right? It's got to help your stuff go into motion, okay? But a lot of the time, especially if you have a history of trauma, you might be set off by little triggers as you go through your everyday life. And there might be what they say is faulty neuroception. So as we've talked about in past lessons, you might sense that something's dangerous when it's actually not dangerous, and your animal defenses might start to kick in along with your vehement or dysregulated emotions. So like the picture there, which I've used in a previous presentation as well, it's kind of like seeing a rope and thinking it's a snake. And then my whole system goes into overdrive thinking I need to hurry up and protect myself. But chances are it may not have been a very dangerous thing at all. But it leads me to experience some very unpleasant, dysregulated hyperarousal or hypoarousal and the emotions that go along with it. Okay, so these emotions might feel like overwhelming to me when they come up, like an overwhelming flood of emotions. Or on the other hand, I might feel like I'm numb and I have no emotions at all. Or they might come up on a regular basis and I might feel like I'm having the same emotion over and over again. Like I'm chronically anxious, I'm chronically angry, right? And they might feel unreasonable or out of proportion. Like the littlest thing set me off and I'm really set off, okay? So that's characteristic of vehement or dysregulated emotions. They're not in that comfortable arousal zone like the life-enhancing emotions. They're much more intense, okay? All right, so here's a good kind of visual for us to kind of imagine the way this all pans out in our real life experience. So on the left, as you can see, we might confront something that feels like a danger or a threat, and it sets us on high alert. So it might actually be a true danger or a threat, or we might have a faulty neuroception and have a false alarm where we think something on an unconscious level is dangerous or threatening to us, right? So it triggers us, okay? So once that trigger is set into motion, our animal defenses are the first thing to kick in. And that's associated with our primitive reptilian brain, right? Which has to do with the fight, flight, freeze, and all that stuff, okay? So those help us to respond to the danger or threat. Next, the next fastest thing is our emotions. So first, we go into the animal defenses before we're even conscious of it. Then our emotions from our mammalian brain, our emotional brain, start to kick in. So the emotions are like the vehement emotions we just talked about that support and strengthen the animal defenses. So it gives fuel to the fight, flight, freeze, fold, etc. Okay. And then the last, the slowest but most advanced part of our brain is the thinking part of our brain, the neocortex. So after those first three things happen, it kicks in and it starts to interpret what's going on and maybe give some meaning to figure out what's happening on a more conscious level using words, okay? So that's sort of how this progression goes, all right? So how do we know if we're having a vehement emotion? So they offer us some questions we could ask ourselves. So if you happen to answer yes to these questions, chances are it's a vehement or dysregulated emotion. If it's a no, chances are it's a more life-enhancing everyday emotion. Okay, so let's just go through these questions to kind of increase our awareness of our own experience. All right, so if you experience emotion, you could ask yourself, do you have extreme, hyper, or hypoarousal? Is it driven by a neuroception of danger or life threat? So is that what sparked my emotion? Is it connected to an animal defense, such as fight, flight, freeze, fold, and find? Okay. Does the root of it seem to be dysregulated arousal? And do you feel dysregulated by these emotions? Okay. So again, if you answered yes to these questions, chances are they are vehement emotions, not just the everyday emotions. All right. So here's another chart for you to kind of see how this all goes together. So what I did was I listed the key animal defenses and the common emotions that tend to go with them that help to fuel those defenses. Okay, so let's go through these together. So the first few are mobilized defenses that kind of put us in motion to help us. So a fight defense, right? So we're mobilized to fight. Anger and rage, okay? Flight, we're running away from danger, right? Has to do with fear and terror. So if I'm really scared of something, I just want to get right out of there, get away from the threat. Crying for help. So if there's someone available that might be able to help me, it might pay for me to try to reach out for help. Maybe somebody who's more knowledgeable or strong or wise or skilled or equipped with resources can help me, right? So emotions that drive that response could be panic, could be desperation. Please, please help me, right? And I might feel like distressed or frantic if I can't get to a person that I really want to help me, right? I really want that person over there to come over and save me. And until they come, I feel really distressed and frantic, okay? Freeze. So this is an immobile response, but it has to do with high arousal on the inside, but freezing and stillness and stiffness on the outside. So it's like the gas pedal and the brake pumped at the same time. So emotions that commonly go with that: extreme anxiety and panic, helplessness, agitation, and also feeling paralyzed. Okay, so as you can see, there's some fear related to a few of these. It's not just like each one has completely different emotions. There is some overlap. Okay, and finally, shutdown. So that's when you're still. It's like a flop. It's flaccid muscles, kind of, lack of movement. A still, a mobile response, but it's not the tenseness of freeze. It's kind of a looseness, right? A collapse. So this, you might feel nothing at all, emotional numbness, or a sense of detachment, helplessness, or despair. right? So you can see helplessness could be in freeze and shutdown. When you can't move for one reason or another, you might feel like I don't have the power to fix the situation myself. So there's the helplessness involved, okay? So as you can see, right, there's some overlap with the emotions, but, and you might experience it your own way, okay? So there might be an emotion more prominent for you for these different animal defenses, all right? And later on, we'll kind of check in with that for our personal experience during the exercises. Okay, so when we experience these intense, vehement emotions, along with especially our animal defenses, it can feel very uncomfortable, especially if it's sparked for a reason where we're not actually in danger, but it's set off anyway, like we're triggered by something, whether it's something internal, like a bad thought, or a nightmare, or something external that reminds me of something, kind of like a implicit memory, right? As we talked about in previous videos. So when I'm really feeling very uncomfortable with these things, I might engage in desperate attempts to cope, just to try to get back in my window of tolerance and I don't know what else to do, okay? So I might engage in addictive behaviors or quote unquote target behaviors. So, you know, I might smoke cigarettes, I might drink alcohol, use drugs, hurt myself in some way, engage in an eating disorder behavior if I have an eating disorder, whatever it takes for me that brings me back a little bit more regulated, okay? Maybe not the safest way to do it, but maybe it's a desperate way that I figured out that does help a little bit, okay? I might go out of my way to try to avoid the feelings, or I might try to talk myself out of the feelings. Maybe I even try to invalidate myself out of the feelings, right? Or tell myself I'm wrong or criticize myself. So that's another desperate attempt. Often doesn't work. Sometimes it creates more distress because now I'm criticizing myself and there's other emotions later on top of the emotions. Sometimes I try to just avoid the thing that triggered it to begin with. So maybe I'm going to try to avoid the people or the situations or the feeling states that trigger this to start with, because I just don't want to feel that way. All right. And sometimes that works, but you can't always avoid a trigger, right? Things might just come up no matter how hard you try. And if you limit your world and make it super small, you're not going to be living very well, right? It's impossible. You also might kind of detach from emotions. That's sort of a hypoarousal sort of a strategy, but it might happen unconsciously. So you might kind of just, you know, zone out, dissociate a little bit and kind of get away from those feelings. All right. Other times, you might have heard things like, well, when you're really angry, you should just do things like punch a pillow or like, you know, rip a phone book or just do primal screaming, scream into a pillow. Okay. And the idea behind that is that if I have some kind of release of those emotions, it should make me feel better. Okay. But that doesn't usually work, especially when there are vehement emotions tied into these animal defenses. In fact, a lot of times it makes the situation worse. So it makes you more dysregulated. So like beating a pillow could increase your anger rather than decrease it and let it out. Or it might temporarily make you feel better, but it's not resolving the original issue at all. So vehement emotions can be experienced as circular, repetitive, and exacerbated when you start to act them out and they don't resolve, okay? And sometimes afterward, you could even feel kind of just like worn out, like exhausted or overwhelmed by them or confused. And so it's not really a long-term good coping strategy. Okay, so while it's sometimes recommended, it's not good for this type of emotion. All right. Okay, so what is more effective? Okay, we got to get to the more effective solutions, right? So sensorimotor psychotherapy would say, we're going to try a bottom-up approach, right? So a top-down approach would be a thinking approach. So I'm using my thinking brain to deal with my emotional brain, right? But sometimes thinking our way out of it doesn't work. Or our thoughts are kind of scrambled too, and that's not really going to happen. So we're doing a bottom-up approach, right? We're regulating our body in order to regulate our emotions. Or I'm being mindful of the physical experience of those vehement emotions as a way to not act them out, kind of observe them. And by just observing them, they start to change. Or we watch the way they progress and sequence, as we talked about in the previous lesson. We could also choose to use various coping skills and resources. Okay, in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we had reviewed a variety of resources, and especially somatic resources. So putting those into action could help us regulate our vehement emotions. And of course, if there's other coping skills you learned from other places, such as DBT, you could also use these to help regulate your vehement emotions, okay? So some things we can notice as we use directed mindfulness, okay? We can notice our body sensations, one of the building blocks. Hyper or hypoarousal, we could ask ourselves, do I feel revved up today or shut down today? Our action urges or impulses, so the movement building block, what movements am I making or do I want to make? Preparatory movements, such as like a little twitching or a tension in certain muscles, which is a precursor to putting something into action, such as running away, such as fighting, pushing, okay? And shutdown defenses, right? That's a clue that I'm hypoaroused. My emotions are so overwhelmed that I'm shutting down, okay? So I can notice all these things. I could keep my observing mind, my neocortex online, so I could process and observe these things without acting them out in a negative way, all right? Okay, so let's do some exercises together. Okay, so here we go. So first of all, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the resources are going to come in handy here. So I have a variety of videos on the resources that, hopefully you had watched already and have been practicing yourself. If you haven't practiced your resources, you might not have as much success doing these exercises. So I suggest you give it a try first and then practice them and then, use this later. But otherwise, just you could try to use them for this context and see how it works. Okay, but if you struggle with it, you could always go back and review them again. All right. So the top half are the general categories of resources, and the bottom half are the somatic resources. Okay, so here's the first exercise. Me out of the way. So this one's called Emotions, Defenses, and Behavior. Okay, so we're going to try to think about our experience and kind of see how these different pieces fit together for us. Okay, so step one, we're going to think about the different animal defenses. So fight, flight, cry for help, freeze, and shut down. So for each of these animal defenses, go one by one. Okay, you can journal this if you'd like. Identify what emotions do you typically feel for each defense, right? So before I had a chart of it, so those might be the emotions you feel, but you could just do a free response here and just think about the last time I experienced that, what are some emotions I felt at the same time, okay? So you could, on the second one, identify a situation where you experience these defenses and emotions. So that might help you kind of make it a little bit more real. When's the last time I felt like, fighting back with somebody, and what was the emotion that I had, and what was the situation that triggered it, right? So I'm kind of getting that bigger picture. And did I engage in a behavior that I later regretted? Okay, so was I in fight mode, for example, and then I yelled at somebody and I said things I regretted, right? Or was I in cry for help mode and I got so needy with somebody and I blew up their phone and I kept asking and asking for them to talk to me, and now they're mad at me. Okay, so what did I do that may have, gotten in the way of a healthy response, making the situation better? Or did I do something desperate to try to feel better? Did I engage in a target behavior or drink too much or use too much drugs because I was trying to calm down when I felt those emotions and animal defenses, okay, in that situation? So what happened? All right, what did I do that I might have later regretted? Okay, so you could just secretly admit this to yourself if you want to, or if you have a therapist, you could share it too. So then after you examine all of that, just think, well, if I were to do it again, what are some resources I could have used that might have helped the situation? Okay, so at the bottom, as you can see, I have really small, the different resources that are discussed in sensorimotor psychotherapy. But if you have other coping skills that you believe could have helped, you could always refer to that as well. Okay, so for the next couple of exercises, I'm going to be referring to this diagram. So you might recognize this because we've used it before in several of the other sensorimotor psychotherapy lessons. There was specifically a lesson about neuroception and the window of tolerance. So this is the diagram from there. Okay, so in the next couple lessons, we're going to look at part of this diagram at a time, but I didn't want you to forget about what the whole diagram was. Okay, so the middle is the window of tolerance, that comfortable level of arousal. The pink part is a high arousal, when you feel like a little bit revved up, but not too bad. And then the hyperarousal danger is when you feel very dysregulated, very angry, very anxious, very panicked. Low arousal is still in the window of tolerance, but a little bit on the mellow side, a little calm, maybe kind of relaxed, but not bad, okay? Hypoarousal is much more shut down, numb, depressed, shameful, stuff like that, okay? So we're gonna do half and half. So here we go. So this is, as you can see, the top half of the diagram: hyperarousal, high arousal, and window of tolerance. So we're going to look at that for this particular one. Okay, so we're going to start with hyperarousal. So we're going to put this together with the emotions. Okay, so when you were hyperaroused, when you think of that time when you might have felt that way, think about it, what emotions you might have experienced. So it might have been something like panic, terror, rage, or other kind of similar emotions. So what are some times when you felt that way, and what were the situations? Then think about this building block of body sensation. So what did my body feel like while I experienced that hyperarousal? Okay, so we're putting the mind, body, emotion together here. So then we're going to move to high arousal. So the pictures, as you can see, kind of dip into that pink area. Okay, so think of times when you felt emotions such as frustration, apprehension, fear, or anger. But so they're kind of, there, but they're not so out of control. So it's a little less intense than the hyperarousal emotions. All right. So when did you feel kind of high emotions, but it was still like in a controllable range? And how did your body feel then? And you might notice that your body feels a little differently when you're in high arousal versus hyperarousal. Okay. There might be some subtle differences you could notice when you think about the times when you actually felt that way. Okay, and so again, if we look at the bottom, we're going to put it together with resources. So think of at least maybe 2 resources that could help you come back to your window of tolerance when you're in hyperarousal mode. So when you're in panic, terror, or rage, for example, what are resources that tend to help you calm back down? Okay. And when you're experiencing the high arousal emotions, such as frustration, apprehension, fear, or anger, what helps you to experience them without making them worse? And what helps you to kind of, like maybe prevent them from escalating, right? So, feel them without, continuing to escalate them. All right. All right. So now we're going to do the same thing with the bottom half. Okay. So the top part here is the window of tolerance, and then the bottom half is the hypoarousal. Okay, so let's start with hypoarousal first. We're going to do the bottom half first. So think of times when you experienced hypoarousal related emotions, such as shame, despair, numbness. Okay, so what triggered those? What were the circumstances around that? And how did your body feel when you were in that mode? Okay, then stepping it back up to the low arousal. So those emotions are a little less intense. So maybe things such as disappointment, sadness, boredom, right? So it's a little bit down, but it's not, like you're kind of totally checked out or totally, your mind is still aware, right? Your thinking brain is still online, available to you. Okay. So disappointment, sadness, boredom, how does your body feel when you're in that mode? And what are some situations that have triggered those feelings? Okay. And there might be different triggers for the low arousal versus hypoarousal. Maybe when it's really bad, then it gets to hypoarousal. But when it's like not too bad, it's low arousal. Okay. So just think about it. Okay. So again, we're going to look at resources. So we want to think about regulating in both sides of it. So when you're in hypoarousal, what are some resources that can bring you back up to your window of tolerance? Okay. And when you're in low arousal, what prevents them from going down to hypoarousal and allows you to just experience them mindfully? Okay, so this one is a nice little emotion diagram here. So in the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy textbook, these emotions are listed in alphabetical order, but I kind of clustered them just to make it a little bit easier for us to process. Okay, so there's groups of emotions that some of them are associated with hyper or high arousal, and others are associated with low or hypoarousal. So I want you to take a note of which emotions felt dysregulated to you, right? And took you out of your window of tolerance. So when did you experience these things, and how did it bring you out of your window of tolerance? So let me just read some of these to you to kind of get you going. All right. So aggression, fury, hostility, rage, revenge. So that's kind of like the anger cluster. Okay. Neediness and desperation, probably the cry for help cluster. Agony, anguish, dread, horror, torment. Ooh, sounds pretty awful, right? Next one, frenzy, panic, terror, probably the flight, right? Next, these are the low or hypoarousal ones. Depression, despair, gloom, grief, helplessness, hopelessness, okay? When did those take you into hypoarousal? Then degradation, humiliation, mortification, shame, okay? When did that take you into hypoarousal? All right, so now that we went through those emotions, we're going to look at the bottom half here. So select 3 of the emotions you feel you expressed in a negative or unsatisfying way. So what led you to, which of the emotions led you to actually act in a way you regretted? Sometimes we just feel them, but we don't act it out. Other times we feel it and then we do something and afterwards we go, oh, what did I do that for? Okay, so think of the ones that actually led you to act out or do something you regretted, because those are the ones we probably want to focus on the most, right? Makes sense. Okay, so think about those particular emotions. Then we're going to do a building block. Describe what they felt like in your body. Okay, think about the time, really make it vivid so you could kind of re-embody them and notice how it's impacted your body. Okay, how did you react to each emotion? So when you realized you were feeling that way, what was the reaction to the emotion itself, right? Did I feel the thing and then criticize myself for what I was feeling? Did I get angry at myself for the fact that I felt this way? Was I disgusted, ashamed, embarrassed, self-blaming, confused, right? So this is like a secondary response to the original emotion. 3, how did you express or manage these emotions? So this is the part where you might have done something you regretted, right? So did I withdraw, lash out, apologize, or overly apologize? Did I sleep all day? Did I engage in a target behavior? Okay, so what did I do that I'm not really happy about? All right, so now we're going to list 3 alternative behaviors or resources, however you want to do, and think of how you might have felt differently if you tried those behaviors. So would they have brought you more into your window of tolerance? Would you have been happier with yourself for how you handled it? What would have been different about putting those resources or coping skills into place? All right. And then once you identify what those are, you could maybe try them in real life. Okay. So if you identify a few things that could have been helpful, maybe try using them and put them into your action to real life and see if your prediction comes true. See if it really does help. Okay. All right. Next. Okay. So we're going to do some more resource work again. So starting with hyperarousal. So resources for dysregulated emotions, hyperarousal. So we keep scrambling up the order of these things, but that's just how it is in the textbook. So that's how I'm presenting it to you. So first, we're going to think about what's a trigger for emotions accompanied by hyperarousal. What set you off, made you experience that? So when you think of the trigger, then think about, well, what were the hyperaroused related emotions I felt? So was it things such as fear, terror, panic, and anger, rage? Okay. So once I think about times when I felt those emotions, think, all right, well, what animal defenses did I have that went along with those emotions? So as you can see here, I only put the animal defenses associated with hyperarousal. So fight, flight, cry for help. Okay. So, and the action urges associated with them, right? So fight has to do with pushing away, shoving, attacking, hitting, yelling at someone to stop, verbally attacking somebody. So fighting with your words, okay? Next, flight, fleeing, run away, backing away, leaving or escaping. Crying for help, making noise, like screaming for help, 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 right? Clinging to people, seeking proximity to people that might help you, right? Getting close to the people who could actually save you, okay? So it's like connect the dots. So what's the trigger that led to the emotion? And what's the emotion that led to the animal defense? And what's the animal defense that led to the action urge? So you could actually like connect the dots for each situation and think of how it impacted you, okay? But the idea again is like to kind of make it real for you, make this whole thing fit into your real life experiences so you can internalize it, integrate it, and better understand it. And now finally in the bottom, thinking about, well, what resources could I use in the future in similar situations that could help with my hyperarousal, okay? All right, next, resources for dysregulated emotions, hypoarousal. So again, similar process. We're going to think of triggers for emotions related to hypoarousal, such as shame, despair, and helplessness. Okay, so what are some situations that led me to feel those things? And then what were some animal defenses that kicked in as I was feeling these things? Freeze or shutdown. So those are the immobilized animal defenses. Action urges for freeze. You're hyper alert, but you can't move. You might choose to hide. You might stiffen up and feel paralyzed. Shut down, go limp, collapse, play dead, right? It's related to the animal play dead response. You might feel numb. You might feel a little foggy, not all there. You might want to sleep all day, curl up into a ball, kind of just go through the motions like robotically, just going along with things, complying when you know you're not really actively protesting or saying much. You're just kind of going with it. Okay. I did put freeze here, even though there's some hyperarousal on the inside, but it's kind of frozen on the outside. So however you want to put it. Okay. So again, triggers, think of what's the trigger, what's the emotion that went with the trigger, what's the animal defense that went with the emotion, and what was the action urge that you experienced. Okay. And again, list the resources you could use to regulate these emotions. All right. I believe that's it. Okay. All right. So there you go. I hope these gave you some ideas and some insights about yourself so you could get better at regulating your own emotions. Okay. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon. All right. Bye, everybody.